two things. Number one, the surging Elizabeth Warren has stopped surging. She really hasn't. And in fact, it looked like she was going to overtake Joe Biden in like most of the national polls. And that didn't end up happening. And it seemed to me that the timing seemed right around the time that she released her ridiculous, borderline insane healthcare plan. If you haven't been keeping up, Elizabeth Warren introduced a $52 trillion healthcare plan. I'm not misspeaking or making that up. That is actually what she's claiming the plan will cost. This isn't like she's putting out a plan and then some other economists are like, oh, this is going to cost way more. It's going to cost like $52 trillion. No, she is admitting that her plan will cost $52 trillion. And then, of course, independent economists are saying it's going to end up costing way more than that. And it would. It absolutely would cost way more than that. But there's actually far more devastating effects than just the cost. But just to get this straight, $52 trillion, even for lefties, I think might be a little bit like, wow, that's pretty insane. I mean, they may not think about it exactly in the same terms that we do, but Jesus fucking Christ. I mean, $52 trillion. I said this before. I just think it's worth it so you can picture this. Elizabeth Warren's health care plan, just her health care plan, is the biggest government in the history of the world. There's never been a government that spent $52 trillion in 10 years. And she's proposing that just on health care. Okay? It would be more than doubling the federal budget. So it's more than our entire government right now just on her health care plan. Now, to keep this in mind, I mean, you can go through these numbers and it just gets so goofy and wacky. But like, if you taxed every person who makes $200,000 or more and every corporation 100%. So you took everything they had, their entire income, they're taking all of it. You couldn't pay for 1 year of this plan. It's just la la land. Like, it's the most ridiculous, absurd plan that I've heard anyone put forward. And I've heard some real ridiculous plans out there. It's in some ways, it's more ridiculous than George W. Bush saying, we'll be greeted as liberators in Iraq. You know, because theoretically, it is possible that they would go like, hey, thanks for bombing the shit out of us. We really appreciate it. It's unlikely, and it didn't turn out that way. But theoretically, you could do that. Like it could happen. There's no way to tax people enough. So by the way, if you had this 100% tax on everyone who makes $200,000 and above, and every corporation, not just individuals. So you didn't even pay for a year of Elizabeth Warren's healthcare plan, and you've fucking destroyed your economy. Because, you know, also, you have a new problem of poverty because now everybody who made $200,000 a year and up is poor because they made nothing now. But forget any of that. Maybe now they'll get some handouts from Elizabeth Warren. But by the way, let's make it clear one more time to reiterate. This is just Elizabeth Warren's healthcare plan. She's also got plans for like free college and housing and all this other shit. But that just her healthcare plan alone. So Elizabeth Warren was running on this thing that like she's got a plan for everything. It's like, look, she's not very charismatic. She's not very fucking charming. She's kind of screechy on stage. She's a fake Indian, if that fucks with you at all. But she's got a plan for everything. And now it came out, and it's actually like her plans turn out are her weakness. That's a bad spot for Elizabeth Warren when you got to run on charisma. So anyway, she has not been doing good in the polls. She hasn't been tanking, but she hasn't been surging the way she was. But who has been surging is our boy Mayor Pete Buttstuff. Buttigieg is doing very well in the polls. Not so much in the national polls, but the last polls that I saw had him in first place or tied for first place in both Iowa and New Hampshire, which are the first two primaries. That's a very big deal. It actually means a lot more how you're doing in the polls in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, because what happens is when people actually start voting, polls shift up and down, especially these polls where, like, amongst the Democrats, the biggest issue that they have is who can beat Donald Trump. That's like their biggest fucking thing, because they hate Donald Trump. They want to see him lose. So if one person starts winning, it's very easy for a lot of people to go behind him. Joe Biden might be up in the polls, but as soon as Buttigieg wins, you know, hypothetically, he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, all of Biden's support now goes to Buttigieg because they're like, well, he's the guy. And he basically is Joe Biden younger and gayer. I mean, there's no difference between, like, they're all basically, look, I'll say this. they're all and this is how politics always works. You have a whole bunch of candidates who are just interchangeable. They're establishment candidates. They're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to appoint the exact same people. I mean, if you could look back at like the 2016 Republican campaign, right? It's a bunch of Republicans, Donald Trump and Rand Paul. That's what the Republican stage was. Those other Republicans, you can mix and match them. They make no difference. Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or John Kasich or Lindsey Graham, they're all exactly the same. Like, I mean, literally exactly the same. They will appoint the same people. They will pass the same laws, the same policies. Everything will be exactly the same. And with the Democrats, it's like you basically have a whole bunch of people, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Tulsi Gabbard. Those are the only ones that are actually different from the rest of the pack. Cory Booker and Joe Biden and fucking Mayor Pete, they're all the same person. None of them are any different. Amy Klobuchar is not any different than Kamala Harris. They're all the exact same. It's just which flavor of this establishment do you like more? Okay? So Mayor Pete, and I want to make this clear because I said this before and some people were giving me shit. Like, I'm not complimenting. I'm not giving you my opinion on this. I'm just speaking politically speaking. Okay? Mayor Pete is the Democrats' only hope to be sane. And it actually looks like he's going to the top. Because look, Mayor Pete, he's got some problems. One of his problems is he's got no reason for running. There's nothing he's passionate about. He doesn't have like an issue. He's just looks politician-y, looks kind of presidential. But when you start going through the list of other possibilities, they're all insane. Like we just did Elizabeth Warren. Joe Biden is fucking 80 and he can't put a sentence together. He literally can't remember names and places. He's a constant liar and he's got a real weird problem with nose humping children. Like that is really bad optics. And he won't stop. He just won't stop doing it. Bernie Sanders, has a loyal following, but he's also 80 and he just had a heart attack. And like, an 80-year-old who just had a heart attack is not going to be commander-in-chief and be in the most high-stress job in the world. That's just not going to happen. Going down the list after that, Kamala Harris is like a cop who is just like horrifically unlikable. They're fucking, all the other guys are just racing to the left. They're putting their hands up for things like we should have open borders and pay for the health care of all illegal immigrants. So these are policies, feel however you feel about them. You cannot get elected on this shit. It's not going to happen. But Mayor Pete, out of the people who are running now, is the most reasonable. Oh, I guess Bloomberg is the newest one. But as I said before, he is a fucking a whiny fucking New York billionaire Jew. And as a whiny New York Jew, I feel comfortable saying that's not going to win the presidency. Anyway, so Mayor Pete surging is interesting. And Mayor Pete does fairly well in these debates. I mean, he doesn't actually like say anything. He doesn't have any ideas, but he sounds presidential enough and he doesn't embarrass himself. Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, has been a nightmare in these debates. She's done terrible. Biden's done terrible. Bernie Sanders is fine. He does what Bernie Sanders does. He's kind of a one-trick pony. You know exactly what he's going to say, but he delivers it with a fair amount of passion and, he knows his talking points. But I think tonight's debate is going to be a big test of that. Like this is when you have something like Elizabeth Warren's momentum fading and Joe Biden kind of hanging on. Another bad debate performance for both of them could be very devastating. And if Mayor Pete has a good debate performance, I think you could see him start to take over and maybe be the front runner. He's the only one there that I see as plausible. Literally the only one. All right. And the other thing about tonight's debate, which the candidate who I'm most interested in and who I'm most fond of on the Democrat side is Tulsi Gabbard. Of course, I actually really like her because she is, as Scott Horton said recently, she is the least bad on the most important issue. And of course, that's the war stuff. And she inserts the most important issue as the most important issue. And she's the only candidate to do that. She's the only candidate since Ron Paul who I've seen who actually does that. Says the most important issue is this question of war, which, by the way, I think no matter what your politics are, you should agree with that. Even if you're like a pro-war neocon, you should go, well, what's the most... Listen, if you're saying we have all of these different policies and one of them is to go send big metal machines of fucking fire-breathing death into countries and fucking slaughter people, that should be, just by nature, the most important issue. And so she at least does that. And I'll say, man, Tulsi really, really needs a big night. She needs a big night. I mean, just to stay in there. Tulsi's hope at this point is basically that her little following, which is, you know, I don't know, the highest I think I've seen her in any poll was like 4 or 5%. Maybe there's somewhere she's been higher than that, but a lot of the polls she's at like 1%. But her little following at least is passionate and is there for a reason, and she needs to at least keep them engaged and keep them on board so that she can stay in the race. This is Tulsi's only angle at this point, is either to have some huge moment at one of these debates that gets her way up in the polls. But I'll tell you, she had that moment against Kamala Harris, and it destroyed Kamala Harris, but didn't do that much to really move her up in the polls. And part of that is because in that confrontation with Kamala Harris, she was taking Kamala Harris apart, but she wasn't really talking about her own policy. Like, she wasn't putting out what she stands for. Like, the difference, what she could have said, like, theoretically there, right, is that, like, you could be like, hey, Kamala Harris, which, by the way, was the best moment of the debates so far, I think, but when she said to Kamala Harris, you put 1,500 people in jail for marijuana, and then you laughed when you admitted that you've smoked marijuana before when you were on like a hip-hop morning show. It's like, what? Now that's a great example of just fucking government, like the whole corruption of this whole thing. Like, you throw people in cages for something you've done yourself, but you get to run for president. They can barely get a job because they got a fucking felony conviction on their record, and you're running for president. Excellent. But what could have been added in there was her saying, if I'm elected president, we will repeal the war on drugs. This has been a disaster. We're not giving the pretense for cops to just go harass anyone they want to, you know, like, and then you've inserted your policy into it too. It's not just about her, but she didn't do that. So it hurt Kamala Harris, but it didn't help her that much. So she either needs one of two things for Tulsi. Okay. She either needs a really big moment that gets her up in the polls, or she needs to at least keep her little audience engaged enough that she can last while a lot of these other people start dropping out. She needs to get down to the last 3 or 4 people in the race. And if she can do that, then it makes it a lot easier to look at all 4 of them. Like, if you get down to a point where there's 4 people in the race left and you're having a debate with 4 people, it's pretty impossible for them not to give you a decent amount of time, right? When there's 10 people on a debate stage, it's pretty easy to fucking, you know, basically give you fucking 90 seconds of speaking time, and that makes things a lot harder. I don't know. I really just hope, I hope Tulsi can do something, just because, I mean, we could fucking use an anti-war left in this country. It seems to me like almost all the anti-war energy is coming from the right these days, and it doesn't seem to be enough to actually do anything. And god damn it, if there's one fucking policy we should all be together on, it's that these fucking wars are retarded.